Hi, welcome to Relish Books. Today is the Monday poetry highlight, and I'm recording this video in the car because I'm down visiting some family in the lower part of the state. So anyway, but I brought a poetry book to read on purpose while I was down here. This is the third time I have read this particular collection, and I think it struck me the most the first time, but it continues to get better and deeper every time. And that is In the Lateness of the World by Carolyn, I'm going to say her name Forche, but I'm not really sure exactly how to pronounce it. This is the only collection of her work that I have read, but it is really, really beautiful. She only has a few other works. I get the feeling that she puts a great deal of time and effort into her work. So there's less of it, but it's really, really great quality. But I definitely want to read her other collections. This collection is so beautiful. And this poetry differs a lot. Again, I really like reading poetry that has certain themes in common, but there's certain common things that I like in poetry, but I really like reading poets that are very, very different from each other. And she is so different. I feel like her poetry, the greatness and the beauty of her poetry lies a lot more in these distinct and vivid images, along with a lot of very imaginative, it's not vague as in a lot of poetry is vague where it feels like it's trying to sound deep by just the author didn't really know what they were talking about. They were just trying to sound deep. It's not like that. It's just, it gives the suggestion of a lot of ideas, but it leaves you to kind of try to formulate them. And I really like that. I really enjoy reading it. You don't know a lot of the time exactly what she's talking about. But it really excites your imagination and gives you a lot of really distinct, bright images to kind of think about. And so instead of, I feel like her strength is a lot in image, in thoughts, rather than structured, like very structured poetry and like exact like wordplay. Her poetry reads more like very distinct prose, I guess. You could almost call some of her poetry like prose poems. She has some that's definitely more like tighter structure, but a lot of it is very, I wouldn't call it loose at all because it is very distinct. It's very clear and succinct, and it doesn't feel like she goes on at all. It's not like she writes these super long poems. But they are quite, tight a lot of the time. There's a lot, they're very dense. There's a lot of density in these poems. A lot of like long, tight lines. And I really enjoy that. I love her concepts. A lot of, something that I love about her, while I love with other poets, a lot of poets feel very, very personally present in their poems. And in this collection, In the Lateness of the World, it's like you don't have a clear idea of the poet herself. She is really indistinct. It's more like a dive into somebody else's mind, and these images and thoughts and stories that you're hearing and seeing, it's more like suddenly being in somebody else's body and seeing these things for yourself, but from this perspective. She herself feels like she's out of it. Like her opinions, her thoughts on these things are no part of it. She's observing something. She's observing these moments in time and history and culture, and just like writing them down for us to see and experience and kind of ponder. I really, really like that. This book, something that I love about this collection is I don't know if I've ever read a poetry collection that was so tightly tied together as a whole. I've talked about how I love it when poetry collections have common themes, but this collection feels like it was written as this book, which is fairly rare for a poetry collection, I feel like. And it's kind of interesting that it ties together so well because it has a ton of themes, a ton of different things that it's talking about. But there's these common things that tie it all together, like multiple things that she mentions over and over. I like how she talks about people in her poetry. That's something that's kind of rare, I feel like, for a poem to just talk about another person. And she'll just talk about these people, like these friends, and they're not necessarily in context. You don't get a context for these people. You just get mentions of them. There's a woman who's mentioned a couple times in some different poems, and I feel like she's maybe a grandmother to the poet, but you don't know for sure. And I like that. I think that's fun. She mentions like a friend, but there are these themes that really run through all the poems and connect them to each other. Sorry, the sun is like really bright. But stones is one of the common themes. This feeling of stone, and then a common theme is like water. So, and war. I feel like war is probably the most concrete idea that's running through this, kind of like life and death and wartime, especially when the collection opens. There are these images of survivors, images of corpses and death and destruction. So there's these themes of death and survival, the people left behind. And you see that it's almost like it's told from a natural point of view, like in the stones, in the ground, in the mountains, in the people, in the sea. And it's really, really beautiful. It's hard to describe it all, obviously. There's so much there, but these common themes, sometimes she'll just use like words too, to connect these poems that seem like they're on totally different topics. And then there'll be these words that it's like, oh, she talked about that object in like the last poem. Like she mentions glass a lot. She uses the imagery of glass. She uses gloves for whatever reason. It's like she picked these key words that are scattered throughout the poems that connect everything so well into this cohesive piece, even when the poems might be about all kinds of different things. And I really love that, and it sets the whole tone. The whole tone is not about war and death. I think it's really about life and survival, but even the poems that aren't about any of those things bring in these key words that connect everything together so well. And as a whole, it's one of the best collections I've ever read because it does read all together super well. And the style, I love the style, like suggestive and concrete. Just a perfect mix of those. I think she's super, super talented. Again, excellent word choice while still being like nothing fancy, nothing like she's trying too hard, nothing like too high flown. And yet it's distinct and beautiful, and her word choices are really striking. So I love that. Yeah, it's a really, really great collection. I feel like there was something else I was going to talk about it, but I'm not immediately remembering. But yeah, it's great to read and reread, and that's I think that's something that lets you know that poetry is really great. Sometimes you can read like a poem and be like, that was a good poem, but you have no desire to like read it again. And this collection, I really think is great to read over and over. There are, like I said, it's a lot of the poems are about war, about some of the horrors of war. So there are a couple pretty blunt, like graphic moments, not like super graphic, but some disturbing images, I guess, that are kind of passed over pretty briefly, but still, I remember the first time reading it. There was one passage in particular that was quite disturbing, but poetry, so amazing. It's really great. I'm trying to find some of my favorites. Oh, Elegy for an Unknown Poet is really great. Oh, Letter to a City Under Siege, I think is really great. They're all really great, but those are some of my favorites. Yeah, The Refuge of Art. They're all great. They're all great, but yeah, so many different themes. It's like she's covering a million themes, and yet it's tied together so well. And a ton of different places. It feels like she's talking about a bunch of totally different countries. She's talking about war, but you don't always know at all, like, what war or what country. Sometimes the names sound Russian. Sometimes they sound like it's some little third world country. Like, you don't know, and that helps make it just like not just confined to one place, but a very human experience. So, absolutely love this. Highly recommend it. And I definitely want to read the rest of her work at some point. So, that is my quick Monday poetry spotlight. Thanks for watching. I will hopefully be back on Friday with my next Jane Austen review, although even though Northanger Abbey is the shortest, I think, Jane Austen, I'm having the hardest time getting through it. So, but hopefully I'll be back on Friday with that review. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.